All right, we're live, James. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's great day. Great to be back in town. It's after a little bit of travel.
Oh, where were you headed to?
Out to do a client AI workshop out in Colorado, and then speaking at a conference in Texas last week. Both were great.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I figured we could start off with some introductions so people knew kind of what we're bringing to this conversation and why, we feel like we at least know enough to be dangerous to even be talking about it. But would you like to go first?
That sounds great. Hello, I'm James Stovall, and I am a partner at WorkFast Consulting doing transformation of businesses generally related to AI, but several other practices in there, talking about workforce and things of that nature. But my background, I'm a technical in background nature with computer science from Georgia Tech undergrad, and was with Deloitte for 10 years doing analytics consulting, things of that nature. A lot of working with large, complex global organizations that you would certainly know. And yeah, do a lot with AI now. And so excited to talk more on this topic.
Awesome. So my name is Josh Vesley. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Find.ai. And at the core, we're a frontline workforce technology platform, but we are consistently incorporating more AI capabilities into the platform and really see a future that is becoming drastically different for all different types of workforces with the capabilities that AI can now bring to the table and make really useful and tangible for every workforce environment that's out there. So I'm especially excited to talk to James because I know he's doing a lot of this transformational work in the field with different customers. And I think one of the biggest things that I often hear, James, and would love to just kind of open it up with is when people hear AI, I think I get one of two reactions, right? It's either somebody that's incredibly excited and they just want to talk all about it, or somebody that feels like they've maybe been hit with that nomenclature so many times that it's kind of like they've become numb to it because they don't really understand it. And so maybe just to kind of get us started, how do you describe what AI's capabilities are, or how to think about it in the context of somebody's business, especially when it comes to businesses that work in a very dynamic labor population with a lot of different workforces?
Sure. No, great question. I would say I do see that dichotomy of the excitement versus kind of the fear of that. And I think it also depends a little bit of the why and how much exposure people have had to it. So I think there's a lot of people that see tremendous potential, saying, hey, this could be as big as the electricity or the internet or even fire for humanity. So I think that there's tremendous potential that can also be overhyped, even with tremendous potential. So I think there's also those people that have either fallen into overhype or haven't really looked at it, and they're being pitched so many different AI solutions, but they're not starting with their problems and to really think about how AI can tangibly help them. And then you do get overwhelmed from that. So when I think about how to think about AI in your business, to say, a lot of people say, hey, how can I just make my business better? But if I try to make it really simple, what I would say is, how would you work your business differently if you had 500 interns that were on the other side of a chat that you could ask a question to or ask to do some task for you? A lot of people, obviously, you could make things more efficient and do things for you, but what if you could also ask them to do analysis for you, or to complete tasks, or to even think about new ways for your business and new opportunities and offerings that you could create? So there's an interesting study about kind of what people do and thinking about why they go into doing AI, and then what they actually come out of it with.
Yeah. Well, and I think the biggest question that I often go back to is like, what are the areas of repetitive task or inefficiency when it just comes to things that have to be done manually, right? Whether that's keying in information about, jobs, or making manual adjustments to a system that tracks, different information. And so when I think about the starting point for somebody thinking about AI, do you think it is better for them to really kind of map out a certain area within the business that they're thinking about and go through a bit of an exercise of either writing out those workflows or kind of how do you get them started?
Yes. Well, I think the key, it's a mix. I do believe in falling in love with the problem before you fall in love with the solution. So I think that's very important to be really focused on what are the things that you need to do that, to the point that you're making. But I also think you need some base AI literacy. In fact, that's what LinkedIn rated as their top 2025 skill, not just from an opinion, but from actually what's needed in jobs that are being posted today. And so I think it's really understanding what AI is possible for doing the types of problem sets, like you talked about, repetitive problems or the types of research, consolidating large sets of data, and then thinking about what problems do I have in this space? And if I had tools like this available, what would be the problems that I should really think about? So that's where I get people to start and capturing a lot of use cases and saying, what are the big annoying problems in your world? And I'll say in the half-day AI workshops that we run at WorkFast, that typically we see a lot of people, their base use cases are writing emails with AI, or they're using AI as what I would call a glorified search engine to synthesize search engine results, which are both good and a great start. But there's so many other use cases of AI. And so once we start to open their mind and thinking about, even with prompting, before you get into workflow automation and agents and all of that, there's so much that you can be done thinking it, like, again, think outside the box. My 16-year-old son, he's doing dual enrollment. He has 2 classes at his local high school and 2 classes at online at a technical college locally that he's taking. But then to take the 4 syllabus of those different classes and combine that and say, build me out a calendar for the whole semester and look at all the different things that I have to do and when I need to study and when are my tests, et cetera. It's just an outside the box use case that people aren't thinking offhand when they think about a traditional prompt.
Yeah. I think that's, interesting in the aspects of, there's been a lot of, I think, discussion around what AI can do to synthesize information and be able to understand, what is the logic and or the inference that needs to be made in order to action something. But when we're talking about the next level, I guess, of AI capabilities and really thinking about generative AI that is, able to create whether that's, visual prompts or analysis. One of the biggest things that I think is still not quite fully understood is the different components of the generative pieces and kind of how the data structures and kind of the orchestration of that data needs to be either trained or decisioned. And so maybe you could just dive a little bit deeper specifically into the generative AI pieces to really kind of articulate some of the ways that you would break down the components that need to go into that, and really kind of how that might be different than more traditional like pattern matching and just, general recognition of information.
I mean, I think one of the things that we've talked about would be that AI has been around for a long time. When I was in computer science, I graduated 25 years ago. We were doing AI then, but it was if-then AI. And then it kind of moved into machine learning, like kind of like that pattern recognition and looking at hey, here's what happened the past 10,000 times. What should happen on the 10,001st? And generative AI and really the democratization of AI is really what broke apart that. We're talking more recently in the past couple of years, where it took like an OpenAI and ChatGPT that could take that information and synthesize it and then predict what the user answer would be based upon a certain knowledge base. So if we said very simply for people, obviously there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes of that. But if you're an end user of AI, ultimately it's saying that there are different AI for different purposes. One, to kind of do text and build that. There's predictive AI, which is a very different subset. Like you can ask ChatGPT, what are the Cubs going to do this year or in the playoffs or whatever in the regular season? How many?
We already know. We already know what you're going to do, James. You're going to do quite well.
But you could ask that, but a ChatGPT is not really a predictive tool in that case, a sense of predictive, but it will predict what your answer would be if you said, hey, give me what an interview question set, which should be associated with that resume. That's a task that generative AI can do very well for you. And what I would say is really thinking about how do you take that past data and predict it. And what I think makes AI so special is that you can take it and give it sets of files and have it quickly synthesize it. So like when I was in Colorado, I mentioned we took a client's data set and dropped it into a SharePoint folder and built a no-code agent in just a matter of minutes that could synthesize all their contracts and extract out things like, let me pull out all of your dates of when your contracts are going to expire and build that into a spreadsheet. And then you set a trigger to send a reminder email about when the contracts are going to expire to take some action. That's the things that AI can do very well in terms of pulling out data, looking at that, and starting to predict what the user might want based upon the way things have been structured in the past.
So you're bringing up a great point, because it's also been, I don't know, relatively recently I've heard this whole narrative around, the general models that have consumed the world's data, right? And I can't remember if it was Sam Altman or Musk or, one of the giants of the AI, but basically they're like, we've consumed all the data. Like now the data
Right.
has all been pushed into some sort of a database and a model. And they're talking about, now synthesizing data. But the question that I guess I'm trying to ask here is, does the size of the data set matter if you're trying to answer a really specific question for a very specific industry? Because what I've come to understand is that bigger isn't necessarily better. Like the uniqueness of a data and training an AI agent or model on something that is very unique might still require some size, but will give you much better answers and direction than that data mixed in with thousands of other examples from other environments.
Yes. I mean, it definitely depends on, there's different models for different types of problems. But to your point, asking for very specific problems to train it on a smaller set of data. And if you get really deep with a model and really train it deep on, DNA sequencing or some very specific problem, the model actually gets terrible at the general questions because it gets honed in on a very specific answer. And so, I mean, people have this idea of AI super intelligence that's going to exist that can answer all questions. But at least what we're seeing today is people who are specializing in, say, building generalist tools to solve certain problems, and then specialized tools. And that can be, a cloud-based tool, or people who are standing up, open source, small models on, that can run on their laptop and process things to handle very specific use cases. Or again, using something like a SharePoint folder to drop files in and have, hey, answer based upon these set of files, for example. Or again, it could be Google Drive with Gemini or what have you.
So now this kind of leads me into the whole idea of a multi-agent platform where, again, going back to this idea of orchestration, or having an orchestrator that decides like, this AI agent is going to go do this task, bring back this information. This one's going to go do this over here. And if you're looking at things that have a wide variety of variables that are going to want to interact to give you the right answer, right, then maybe those agents need to talk to each other before producing a result. How difficult is that for an organization to build? And or, I think about the whole idea of software in general is like, there's always been this concept of build versus buy. And if the real value that you're going to deploy is the data, right, that unique data moat that you have, yes, you still need the other layers on top, but it seems like it would be challenging to build out highly complex models as an organization while you're still trying to maintain a good deal of data integrity to be able to then train those models with. But again, I feel like it's getting better and faster for agent training and deployment all the time. But there is this concept of how you actually orchestrate what the agents do and how they produce that information that I think is still going to be rather challenging for most organizations to build on their own.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. I think that to say the statistics for greenfield, like truly custom model development and deployment and building in the data pipelines and all of that, we do that for clients and that happens, but those don't have as high of success rate as the ones that are more off the shelf and importing data and doing that because of the usage and there's, the maintenance of it and all that. And I can give you examples of it, like, in a greenfield, okay, we had one that was predicting a certain product that was weather related, but having the weather data come in daily, we had to refresh it manually until you automate the pipeline of data getting it to come in. So you can build a quick pilot, but then, you have to think about developing it and building it for the long term to develop some of those types of things. So I think that there's a mix in answering about thinking about that buy versus build. But I would say if you look at the adoption of tools, it's also the tools that are embedded. So the ones that are really growing are the ones that are in people's existing work suites. So like Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot are really exploding in usage. Now, Copilot's underlying tool, of course, is ChatGPT. But this to say, because they're embedded in all the things that people are already doing, and they're more naturally tying in and connecting to your existing infrastructure of your emails and your files, that's allowing a lot more usage to be able to adapt it rather than building something that's out there. And I would say that's one of my mindsets when you talk about the easiness of doing it. One of the interesting things, there's a big MIT study that came out in the last couple of weeks that said 95% of AI projects are failing. And so you say, like, why would you ever suggest an AI project if that's the case? But those are really enterprise, publicly declared projects that are essentially the home run projects. So one of my theories is that 20 micro AI projects are better than one moonshot AI project in terms of driving productivity.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't tell you personally how many times I'll use it for meeting prep or synthesizing a bunch of information that I need to share back to a group or a client. And again, that wouldn't be a enterprise, home run AI use case, but it's all these little slivers of time where I'm now being able to be way more productive, because what would have taken me, an hour or two in the past literally can be as quick as 5 to 15 minutes, depending on, what model I'm using and how perfect I want the outcome to be. But I think that's absolutely right. I think in any use case, the larger the undertaking, the higher degree of potential failure, what failure points there are. So I think that could be applied in general to most, projects out there. It's like the largest ERP migrations or whatever. It's like, they probably have a higher failure rate than adding a new database into, some system architecture or tech stack. And so,
I agree.
Yeah. The other thing that, was really astonishing to me was specific use cases in things like business intelligence. So you and I have seen a lot of different BI platforms out there, and I won't name names, but whether it's visualization of data, the calculation and predictive nature of these BI tools, and knowing that, for example, in our platform, we utilize multiple models. So we like Gemini for some things, and we like ChatGPT for some things, and again, the orchestrator of kind of which model is being used and the agent that's kind of performing that task, I think is really interesting. But when it comes to BI and especially visualization of BI, that does take a lot of different pieces of information to come together. And we're seeing a very real example of the generative BI being prompt-based and self-serving to organizations based off of these models. And so, one of the things that I'm really curious about is companies spend millions and millions of dollars on these business intelligence tools. So will this just become embedded in other platforms and products instead of having to now have this separate bucket of technology that's really driving at those outcomes?
I think that's right on. And I mean, I thought was really interested that the Microsoft CEO said this summer, a couple months back, said basically they believed that enterprise software was not going to exist in the future. And really, it would be a series of databases that stored information and then agents that went and analyzed that data and came back with answers to the users. And so that's someone who their core business is enterprise software, right? So I think that does say that's an interesting change to say. Now, how far out is that? That's a whole separate debate. But I do agree with you. I think business intelligence has radically changed. I think I mentioned, starting at Deloitte, my first project coming out of Georgia Tech was implementing SAP Business Intelligence, 23 years ago for a large global beverage company here in Atlanta that some of your listeners may know, and stayed up their data. And it was great in some ways because you could actually pull data globally and look at information to be able to find a bunch of answers. But it was also just in the hands of very few people. And now with analytics being democratized and also just the tools, that the way that it's being shared and having dashboards and things like that, now instead of having to go to these few people who know, like at one point I knew their data better than anyone else in the world, and to say, if I have those few experts that can go and pull insights, now you can have business leaders that are actively engaging with the data and can have natural language processing to go and interact directly with the data and ask questions that wouldn't have been possible a decade ago. And so I think that opens up a whole new set of possibilities about driving a data-driven culture and for non-technical users to explore data, reducing bottlenecks, and then assist in all the value they get from it, from insight generation, forecasting, personalized recommendation, getting context. So I feel like there's a lot of things that the doors are opening that we're only beginning to see the benefits of.
Yeah. The natural language piece, and I just wanted to make sure, since you dropped Georgia Tech, that I showcased my Northwestern
very nice
alumni status here, just because I don't want one group to get too much attention over the other. But natural language. So to me, it's like that is the key. Like if I was to choose a destination that I would want us to really be working towards in any discussion around AI, is the ability for organizations to think about how individuals could use natural language, just, again, how they talk to colleagues in, the real world, to prompt AI to help them solve problems, right? So I never have done any computer programming or development, but you need to code software in a specific language. It has to make sense for that to actually work in terms of what you're trying to build. But if I say, hey, I want to know how many people I got on the third shift today, versus I want to know how many employees are scheduled to work on XYZ shift, without having to say it in the most, prescriptive manner and get the same result, I think is really a nirvana that most organizations would love to get to. And I guess to get there, is it just easy enough to say you should, as an organization, start experimenting with putting data into some form of a model that can then be prompted and, queried by employees, even if it's something as simple as like the employee handbook? It's like,
Right.
It's something that, we share openly. There's nothing proprietary in there. Nobody's really going to care about it outside of the company in terms of what the procedure is for requesting a day off. But if you can open that up to everybody and say, hey, anything you need to know that typically, if you didn't know the answer, you'd try to go search the intranet or ask your HR person, but you can just quickly go to this digital assistant and ask it, because that, to me, would open up the kind of ideation for what else could we do, right? How else can we engage with this type of technology? So any comment you have on that? But then I want you to go to the other side, which is where do the risks start to come in? When should people start to be mindful of what they're playing around with or how they're using this to make decisions?
Yeah, happy to talk to both those. I agree with you. I think that there's tremendous potential of that, where there are a lot of organizations that would desire to be data-driven. And I would even say there's organizations that claim to be data-driven, but the data is from 6 months ago. which may still be true, but sometimes isn't. But now this ability to gather more real-time data and have real-time dashboards and query at any moment, I think presents tremendous power for organizations to think about what's really happening, to say, hey, we've noticed a sudden change in our sales process of which prospects are buying and which ones are not. And let's immediately take action to address that. That's, growing ever more possible. So I think there's tremendous potential in what can be done. And again, that ability for the non-business users to be able to query and get that information makes it a lot more usable. Where there's a lot of analytics that are out there where people build this great dashboard or great query, and then it doesn't really get used. So I think to put it in to really have a business impact is first really great. I would say on the negative side, there's a lot of issues with implementing this. So for example, will the non-technical users actually use this tool? And the change management piece is certainly a big one. There's a lot of things about high initial setup and integration costs. So I had one client who wanted to spend 18 months building a data lake for securing and making their data accurate, but they're going to pause all AI until that. And obviously that's not good. There's issues of a black box nature of data for the trust level of trust or bias in that has to be determined. So that's one thing. And then I think one other comment would be with the democratization would be the risk of misinterpretation and data governance. Like if we have wrong data and people are using it to drive their personal point of view. I think sales are up for the month of August. Well, you're only counting because there's, less days worked in August compared to days worked in August the previous year or whatever it is, and can use data to try to tell their story, preconceived conclusion rather than really driving on what the data is saying.
Yeah. I think the risks early on is, especially if you don't have a human in the loop, to be able to understand where there is maybe a low threshold of confidence from what the AI can understand and interpret and respond with. I know this was a pretty funny term when I first heard it, but the ability for an AI to hallucinate, it's a very real potential if you don't have guardrails on that. And so as you're thinking about putting things together and starting to test them and open them up to a broader audience internally, you can get the initial kind of reaction of the users of who's going to use it, who's not. But then, how do you think about human in the loop and just making sure you have some sort of governance over things that start to slip before they can kind of get a little bit too dangerous?
I agree. It's that it's the human loop from both like making decisions, like a lot of organizations like want to jump to AI making the decision, which oftentimes you need that human in the loop because of that, or there's from a data cleanliness. So we had one client who, we're looking through their transactional data. We're like, you have all these negative transactions with your client. What's going on here? And they're like, oh yeah, that's just like an accounting cleanup. And I'm like, but you're training AI on this data and that's going to cause these implications in your reporting that comes out of it. And they're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So I think that's a big thing. I also just think people get, concerned. Like I said, I mentioned it very briefly, but thinking about the bias. And a lot of people have this impression like AI should have no bias. And obviously I think that's an ideal goal, but I think the reality is to say, how can we have substantially reduced bias from a human that's currently making that decision today? And I think it's really setting the standard of what that looks like, because anything is going to be biased on historical data or what have you that may make that decision.
Yeah. Bias has obviously a very negative connotation, and for good reason. But I also think that there is bias towards different thresholds of risk management. So it's like, hey, I want the bias of this AI to give me worst case and best case scenarios, right? So it's like I should be able to have there be some sort of a range of interpretation that says, if everything goes great for the month, sales are going to be Y.
Yes.
But if the historical pattern of delays or, negotiations in the contract, like it'll be X. And like the delta between that is what you need to kind of manage for as much of as an upside to the Y as possible, et cetera. But I think that is something that people should really think about how they want to manage it to be more directionally accurate. I mean, if it's a black and white issue, I'll give you an example that, we're working on is auditing things like time card compliance or collective bargaining agreement compliances. It's very nuanced in terms of the number of variables that need to be taken into account and, all the different levels of compliance that needs to be considered. But at the end of the day, a time card is either compliant or it's not compliant. Like you're going to butt it up against these different factors. And in that case, the risk of that non-compliance could probably have a range of outcomes, but the compliance issue is kind of a black and white, yes or no.
Yeah.
So is it easier or is it better? And again, this is just personal opinion, to start with things that are just black and white, or is it easier to give it something that has a little bit of latitude of like, if this, then that, and, best case, worst case, because that just allows people to not feel so pressured by the consequence of like, oh, this went wrong. Well, it was either wrong or right, so now we're not going to do anything with it, versus like, oh, it was within the range kind of a little bit. So I don't know if you...
Yeah, I'm tracking with you. I would say, I think there's pros and cons to doing both. But I think for me, it's actually there'd be a third factor would be the biggest key. And it's finding something that you can find a measurable outcome to be tied to. So if you're projecting like, okay, I sell physical products and how many of these 26 different products are going to sell. And we have a human who's deciding this today and making projections about that. But let's run an AI model side by side by that, so you can see at the end of, predicting, 3 days out for the, for a whole month, who is more accurate at predicting that. And we found AI models are better than even humans that have been in the job projecting some of that, for 5+ years where they've been doing it, because it can bring in other factors and synthesize data and see bigger picture trends, which are pretty neat. So I think that if you can show that, because otherwise, if you have a gray, I guess it's not saying that you always want to pick the black and white issue, but if you have a gray one, who's to say that the outcome of the AI model is better? And so you want to ultimately say, what's something that I can make sure that it's not just like, hey, this AI model presents something interesting, but it's actually projected and what can it tangibly impact my business?
Yeah. Well, immediately when you started talking about that, like where my head went to was the self-fulfilling prophecy of like, the AI model says we're going to sell more of this. Okay, so now all sales and marketing shifts over to that. And guess what?
Yeah.
They sell more of it. It's like,
right.
Awesome. The AI model was right, but was it right? Or is that just where we, positioned all of our effort and intensity? And so we kind of made it come true. And again, I think that's where you still want to have some level of competing game theory or, tests that are allowing you to see different outcomes based on actions and, inactions of the data that comes through. But to bring it maybe back to where is this kind of going future state? I thought about, I listened to this this podcast that's called Founders, and this guy reads all the biographies of founders and kind of gives their life story and kind of key lessons learned in a much more compressed fashion. But one of the things that always came up in every single one of them, starting with like the Carnegies, was, this investment in automating the things that you can for efficiency and really drilling into the management of overall cost of running the business, right? Those who manage the cost the most effectively will typically be the most successful at, the long run of an arc of a business. And so, in the future, I'll ask this question kind of point blankly, but then I'll allow you to respond however you want, is, can you survive? Can you survive as a business in the world without adopting these practices, let's just say in 5 years?
Sure. I would say my reaction would be, it depends highly on which business you're in, and that AI adoption is happening a lot bigger than others. So one, I would just say, like if we look at AI, people who say what percentage of people say I use Chat GPT at work. Pew Research did that. This March versus 2 Marches ago, March of 23, it was 8%. And this past March, it was 28%. So it's going up incredibly, but it's still way lower than most people would expect. So one, I would say, I know
28%, huh?
Only 28%, but think about all the truck drivers, think about all the nurses, think about all the people that are doing things that are not like in the bubble that you and I are in, that are touching AI and everyone's using it. So I think you have to think about that. So I would say when I think about 5 years, there's absolutely going to be certain fields that are completely transformed. So, if you're like I was on a panel last week and someone said AI isn't taking jobs. And I said, I can give you a job in this industry that AI took last week. Because I can see it right in front of me. So I think that's a naive part. But I would say, I think there will be fields like if, people doing data processing, I think that's a field that's completely changed and AI will take that over in the next 5 years. But if you were doing, pumping out septic tanks, I don't think that if you don't adopt AI in 5 years, it's probably not going to significantly change your business. So I think it really depends on what the nature of what your work is. But I would say overwhelmingly, it is transforming. And we're seeing organizations that are, building tools and products and offerings, and then a new feature gets released by OpenAI and suddenly wipes out a whole set of businesses. So I think that there's a tremendous disruption that's taking place, and organizations that don't use AI are certainly going to be at a competitive disadvantage. And the question will be like, do they have some other overwhelming characteristic like infrastructure or relationships that they can hold on for a certain amount of time? But I basically tell, my proposition is to say, it's not that someone with AI will take your job, but it's likely that a competing organization that's using AI is going to be able to have something that's, 20% cheaper perhaps and doing the same resources as you. And maybe you'll be able to survive that and maybe you won't.
Yeah. I think it is less about, I want to come back to something you said, but overall, I would say the competitive landscape is what's going to remove those that don't adopt it, not necessarily the AI itself.
Correct.
You mentioned the septic tank company. We actually are working right now with a company that does public works clean out. So, I mean, they have those big trucks with the hoses that will, clean out different waterways and systems. And again, optimizing their schedule for resource balancing and overtime and, the routes that they take. And there's so much inefficiency in the manual way that has been done historically, that if they can reduce, a waste of 3 to 5%, but then they just pass that back into newer equipment, lower costs, better contract terms, whatever. And again, I think organizations are going to, continuously like try to meet the need of whatever they need to do to be more efficient and effective as more competition adopts this. But the one thing I wanted to go back to that you said was, I see this all the time on LinkedIn, and I got to tell you, it always kind of makes me laugh, but I truly believe it's not the case. Is like, AI is not stealing jobs. It's enabling better work to get done. And it's like, I agree with you. I think that for the most part, that can be true if the organization that no longer needs this job to be done wants to retrain and reposition somebody now that they have into more of a shared responsibility of other work.
Yes.
But that work that was being done by a human is gone. Like it's not coming back to a 40-hour a week job that person had before. Their job can change, but they're not doing that anymore. And so why is this so scary? Because it's not like it's the first time it's happened, right? I mean, there was a whole bunch of people that used to have jobs, horseshoeing horses, and they don't have jobs anymore. So there's a whole nother industry that's going to get created here. But it's not the same, right? And I don't know why everybody is so afraid to say that out loud.
Yeah, I do think it's a fear of the unknown. And I think there is something where with AI, because of its ability to create software and create, intelligence and personas that can do things, that you have all these people, and also some of the leaders of that, like the CEO of Anthropic that makes Claude, said in March, 90% of all code in 3 to 6 months is going to be written by AI. Now, we've gotten up to 30% of all code today being written by AI, which is an incredible achievement, but he was way off in his timing and sequence, right? Because we're that 6 months from March has already, come and gone. So I think that it's finding that happy balance of what is the right projection of what's happening. And I think people again, think about the internet 25 years ago. People were like, oh, everything's going to be on Amazon and there's no retail and there's all these shopping. But if you look at total goods purchased, I think it's still something like only 20% of all goods purchased are coming via online retailer versus going to physical. There's a reason why they're building Home Depots and grocery stores and all this stuff because of what people are still buying. So I think that people say, there's people who do hyperbole on both sides. It's going to have no impact and it's going to change everything. And all the jobs, like I think the CEO of Anthropic said, all jobs that are done virtually are going to be gone in 3 years because AI can do them. I don't believe that, but I think it's going to be profoundly changing work. And I do think when you start looking at a 10-year horizon, you start saying, what is our economy going to look like? It's really hard to predict.
James, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I won't get us down that rabbit hole just because I feel like 10 years from now, what's our economy going to look like is, I don't know, it's a dark topic if we want to make it one. But
I hear you.
But I think that, even to go back to your internet example, in Home Depot, it's like, okay, I still go to Home Depot to buy, stuff because I want to see it. I just want to, get it and go home and do whatever I got to get done. But I use the Home Depot app a lot to see if what I'm looking for is in stock, right? So it's
exactly.
Like, maybe I'm not buying it online, but I'm certainly using the tools of the internet to improve my shopping experience. And so
absolutely,
I feel like that. And again, I don't think that, this is just my personal belief, I don't think that we're going to live in a world where people don't have work, just because I think it's fundamentally in the best interest of our human nature to have purpose. And I think work and striving for something and doing things gives people that purpose. I just think it's going to be fundamentally different. I don't see how it can remain even the same that it is right now with, what'd you say, 28% of people using
that was
AI?
March.
Yeah, and maybe it's because a lot of people don't realize that they're using AI in their job too, but
100%, yeah.
And so it's like, it's gonna be just woven into the fabric of everything that we do, from school to work to religious service. I mean, I think it's just gonna touch every facet of our lives because it is so powerful that if you're not utilizing it somewhere, you're really going to be at a detriment for general interactions and your ability to be successful, whatever that means.
Yes, I perceive most of the people that are going to be listening to this, that your industries are going to be very highly impacted by AI. So I'm giving the examples of ones that are not going to be touched, but overwhelmingly the ones that have any type of white collar administration are going to be hugely impacted. And I feel like the window of competitive advantage from using AI is slowing down, and kind of falling behind is where you're starting to get to for that. And I work with a lot of companies that I would consider in that 0 to 40% AI adoption that are really looking to accelerate it. And there's some great opportunities in some industries to do that. Talking with like a construction company tomorrow, talking with an engineering firm today that have great opportunities to be able to use it. But it's like, how quickly is their industry going to change? And it's going to be, is it a competitive advantage where they can get ahead, and how long can they sustain that advantage? But going up on that AI curve sooner rather than later is going to yield a lot of results.
James, this was awesome. I want to leave you just with one last thing, which is, if I'm a business today and I'm thinking about my AI strategy or just trying to even figure out where to get started, what would be maybe like 2 or 3 things that you recommend they do internally to kind of assess their readiness and maybe try to articulate what they're hoping for at the end of that process, just to kind of get them started on something?
Yes, I would say 1, start with AI literacy if you don't already have that, to make sure people understand it, and beyond just using AI for emails and search engine type capabilities. So I think one, to see where is your population at today. The data would say that 50% of your folks have already put in confidential company data into a public AI. So just know that by not addressing the topic, that doesn't solve it. And so then the second thing I would think about is to say, rather than come up with an AI strategy, to say, what are the parts of my business that are changing and where do I need to change? And how do I think about those changes in the age of AI? So falling in love with your business problems and saying, here's the ones that I have. And in this world of AI, what are the ways that can impact that? And it's really three things that you need: AI knowledge, business knowledge, and a growth mindset. And I see different organizations that have different combinations of those three, but you need all three, I think, to be successful. And if I were to think about a third thing, is how do you prioritize the ones that are really going to be impactful? Because like we help organizations after we do a workshop that maybe they've saved, every single person in the workshop is saving 4 hours per week. But how does that time get applied? Or I think I have a next door neighbor who's a doctor and he saves 45 minutes every single day by doing transcription of his patient meetings. But that's 45 minutes that he can just, leave. Or he can leave early and not stay at the end of the day to do that. Does an employer see benefit out that? Or thinking long term about burnout, retention, quality of care, all of those things. So it's interesting questions to think about why you're doing AI and what does success look like.
Yeah. Those are all really great points. And the last one that you mentioned, I think most organizations, if I was just to leave it with one thought, really have a high degree of interest and maybe, are on different levels of readiness, preparedness to start acting on their AI strategy or interest. And the one thing that I think while you're developing that strategy and thinking about where the business problems and efficiencies can come from is also not thinking about, if I'm saving an hour here or an hour there, how do I just immediately turn that into productivity? Because I think most of the technology that has come beforehand has made most organizations more productive. But ultimately, I think there has been a delimiter on that productivity, or a threshold that people start to get into onto the next. So everything gets such a short amount of time of looking at the details and really being able to absorb what that means for the business, that they're not able to kind of take a step back and think about that bigger picture. And I think more of that is needed within organizations to ensure that people really feel like they're being valued, and also the work that they're doing, they can understand and see how it is impacting the overall mission of the organization.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a huge thing, to have that big picture perspective of what's actually going to drive value here and what can move the needle.
Yeah. James, thanks again so much for the time. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
That sounds great. Thanks, Josh. It was great.
All right.